As always, please retry the question before watching the video. There's several things you need to know to be able to answer this question. If you don't know the answer, please add it to your cheat sheet, master it, and go back 5 before continuing in the video. What is the difference between a clause and a phrase? A clause has a subject-verb combo, a phrase does not. What is the easy way to determine we have a dependent clause? And that is that it starts with a dependent clause marker. We're not going to go over dependent clause markers in this video because we are assuming that you already have it down from your clause Quizlet. If you do not have your dependent clause markers down, please go ahead and stop the video now. Take the time to master those before continuing in the video. There is at no point that you're going to be getting out of the program what you could be until you have those dependent clause markers down. Everything else in the clause category is dependent on you knowing them. What is the easy way to determine we have an independent clause? And that is that it does not start with a dependent clause marker. What are our three main sentence structures? Independent plus independent, independent plus dependent, or dependent plus independent. How do we separate independent plus independent? The 5 ways. What are the 5 ways? Comma, fanboys, period, semicolon, m dash colon. How do we separate independent plus dependent or dependent plus independent? Comma, always. With those in mind, I want you to take a second now. Pause the video after you hear what I had to say. I want you to determine the sentence structure for F, G, H, and J. Okay, determine the sentence structure of F, G, H, and J. And then unpause the video and we will continue from there. All right, so hopefully you've already determined the sentence structure, or what you think is the sentence structure for F, G, H, and J. If you're having a hard time determining it, we're going to get better at it here together. So let's take a look at answer F. So later, sometime before 959 CE, all of that is just introductory phrases, introductory word, all right? You don't have the start of the clause until you have a subject-verb combo. That's how you know that you're dealing with the actual meat of the sentence. You have a subject-verb combo. So she entered. That's our verb. Entered is our verb. She is the subject, almost always going to be the word that immediately is before the verb. She entered. Subject-verb combo, this is our first clause. It does not start with a dependent clause marker, therefore it is an independent clause. Then we'll continue on to find our next verb. It was. If you don't have your helping verbs memorized, am, is, are, was, were, take the time to get those down. They're the most common verbs on the ACT, and sometimes students don't even know that they're verbs, the most common verbs. And so it was is our second subject-verb combo. Therefore, we have a second clause. Therefore, we need to determine is it independent or dependent, and it does not start with a dependent clause marker, so we can count on it being independent. So we have independent, independent. How are we supposed to separate independent, independent? One of the 5 ways. They did not do that in answer F. They used a comma. Comma is used for independent plus dependent or dependent plus independent, but can never be used for independent plus independent. So we can eliminate F because clauses are separated improperly. Answer G. All right, we still have the she entered there, which we already determined is an independent clause. And then it throws in this historically, which is a parenthetical. So it's not really there. It's not a subject-verb combo, so it's not our next clause. So we need to go to our next clause. And we're going to find our verb, which is was. This Abby was. That is our subject-verb combo. And therefore, we have a clause that does not start with a dependent clause marker. And therefore, we know that this is an independent clause. And so we need to have one of the 5 ways separating these 2 independent clauses, and we do not have one of the 5 ways. Some of you might have been tricked because it's a fanboy comma, but it must be, the comma must be before the fanboy. And so answer G does not have one of the 5 ways separating independent, independent. Therefore, we can eliminate answer G because the clauses are separated improperly. Answer H. We already know the first clause that starts with she entered is independent. So then we go to our next clause, which is it was. Was is our verb here. It is our subject. It was does not start with a dependent clause marker, therefore it's independent clause. So our sentence structure here is independent followed by independent, and they did, again, not separate it with one of the 5 ways. Answer G. This is where it gets tricky, but the ACT loves doing this. They removed the subject and the verb, leaving us with a phrase instead of a clause. An abbey well known as a significant center of learning. So some of you might think that well known is a verb, but just think about it. If you can add a helping verb to it and it works, then you're almost certainly not dealing with a verb. Okay? You're probably dealing with a participle of some kind that needs a helping verb to be a verb. So it does, well-known sounds like a verb, known sounds like a verb, but it needs a helping verb. Was known to be an actual verb. And Abby was well known as a significant, and therefore this is just a phrase. There is no subject-verb combo, and so we can absolutely separate a phrase with a comma, which is what they've done here in answer J. And that is indeed the correct answer. If this made sense to you, please go ahead and add it to your worksheet. Write what you learned along with the explanation, and then continue on to do the remaining clause 3 questions that you miss on this test. If this is the final clause 3 question that you miss on this test, please go ahead and do the clause 3 mastery until you get 10 questions correct in a row before moving to the next category.